let's jump right into this explainer with a pretty fascinating question. Who actually wrote the blueprint for the modern startup? And I'm talking way, way before Silicon Valley was even a blip on the radar. When we hear the word startup today, our minds instantly go to app developers, venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road, or some small team pulling all-nighters in a garage to disrupt an industry. But the real DNA of the startup, that crazy mix of disruptive ideas, massive personal risk, outside capital, and just towering ambition, well, that was actually laid down over a century ago in a completely different technological frontier.
So, who built America's first billion-dollar startup? Now, you might naturally be thinking of Apple, Microsoft, or maybe Amazon, right? But we're actually going all the way back to the early 20th century to look at an inventor who built a company that literally changed business forever. This founder, he started with barely any capital, he'd already gone through a massively public, stinging business failure, and he was trying to build a product that honestly was way too complicated and expensive for everyday Americans at the time. Plus, he had huge, well-funded competitors breathing down his neck. Yet, in just a few short years, his company wouldn't just transform one industry, it would reshape the entire global economy and change how humans went about their daily lives. We are, of course, talking about Henry Ford. Here is our agenda for today's explainer. 1. America's first great startup. 2. Failure and the pivot. 3. Finding product market fit. 4. Scaling the business. 5. The danger of success. 6. Lessons for modern entrepreneurs.
Section 1. America's first great startup.
It set the scene of it. Back in this era, the hottest new tech wasn't AI or the smartphone. It was the automobile. And what's wild is that even though nobody was using the word startup back then, the exact same startup forces were totally in play. It was like a gold rush. You had hundreds of entrepreneurs out there pitching wealthy folks for cash, building these crazy, untested prototypes in their workshops, and actively trying to take down massive established monopolies like the railroads and horse-drawn carriages. They were all desperately trying to figure out how to scale up before the money dried up. Henry Ford was just one of many scrappy founders navigating this chaotic landscape, and his success was absolutely not guaranteed. Section 2. Failure and the pivot. Before Ford became this towering industrial icon, he actually had to go through a classic startup rite of passage, and that is absolute devastating failure. You can see his journey really kicks off with the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899. The dream was huge, right? But the execution struggled severely. The cars they built were way too heavy, way too complicated, and because of that, incredibly expensive. They just couldn't figure out mass production, their cash burn was off the charts, investors lost patience, and ultimately, the whole thing completely failed. The company was dissolved and Ford was out.
For a lot of aspiring founders, a spectacular public crash like that would be the end of the road. But for Ford, that failure was just information. It sparked a monumental pivot. He realized that just building a car wasn't enough. See, back then, cars were basically seen as luxury playthings for the ultra-rich, novelties used for weekend racing. Ford realized his actual mission was to figure out how to build a reliable machine that ordinary folks, like farmers and factory workers, could actually afford to buy and maintain.
Section 3. Finding product market fit. So, in 1903, he tries again. He founds the Ford Motor Company with a small team and fresh investors. But he's entering a brutal, crowded market where early car companies are disappearing every single month. The traditional mindset at the time was all about making the most luxurious, expensive product possible to squeeze maximum profit out of a tiny pool of wealthy buyers. Well, Ford completely flipped the script. He asked, how can we make a product millions of ordinary people can buy? And in 1908, he delivered the ultimate answer, the Model T. He ditched the heavy luxury stuff in favor of something highly durable, easy to fix, and designed with high clearance to handle the absolute mess that were rural, unpaved roads back then. That shift in thinking from exclusivity to accessibility, it hit product market fit so perfectly that demand just exploded. Section 4. Scaling the business. So now Ford has a new problem, but it's an existential one. How do you physically build enough cars, cheaply and quickly enough, to satisfy this massive tidal wave of orders? In traditional manufacturing, highly skilled workers were constantly walking all over a giant factory, carrying heavy parts, building one car from the ground up. It was slow and demanded enormous labor. So Ford draws inspiration from, of all places, automated meat packing plants, and completely flips the model. Instead of moving the workers, they move the product. The car chassis just rolls down a continuous line past specialized stationary workers, and each person does one specific simple task over and over again as the car rolls by. This moving assembly line was a total revolution. It sped up production dramatically, which led directly to lower manufacturing costs. And because it was so much cheaper to make, Ford consistently slashed the price tag, dropping the Model T from over $800 down to under $300 over the years. Cheaper cars meant a huge flood of new customers, which meant they had to produce even more volume. That nonstop volume made the whole operation even more efficient, driving costs down even further. It's this beautiful, self-reinforcing flywheel of scalability that literally transformed physical manufacturing globally. But Ford also understood that this massive industrial machine needed people just as much as parts. In 1914, he shocked the business world by announcing a $5 workday. That was literally more than double the standard factory wage at the time. Now, while this definitely attracted top-tier talent from all over the globe and practically eliminated the crippling cost of employee turnover, it's important to look at this impartially. That high pay came with some very serious strings attached. Ford implemented incredibly strict conditions for his workers' personal lives, even creating a sociology department that visited their homes to make sure they were living up to his rigid moral and financial standards. His labor policies, along with his anti-union stances, would later spark some deeply embedded controversy. But the sheer impact of what Ford was scaling, it spilled way out of his Michigan factories. By making the automobile accessible to middle-class Americans, he accidentally spawned entirely new industries across the country. Suddenly, there was this desperate need for paved roads, thousands of gas stations, independent repair shops, roadside motels, drive-in diners, and eventually, whole residential suburbs. It really goes to show you, a truly disruptive company doesn't just capture an existing market, it creates an entirely new economic ecosystem right around itself. Section 5. The danger of success. But here is where things get really interesting, because we uncover the hidden danger of this incredible success. Ford believed so strongly in the revolutionary nature of the Model T that it actually became a massive organizational blind spot. The whole assembly line was optimized for this one perfect product, so he famously refused to update the design for years. But consumer tastes naturally evolved. Competitors, especially General Motors, started offering greater variety, stylish new designs, yearly updates, different features, and famously, different colors. Ford was just incredibly slow to respond. It's a harsh reality. The strategy that makes you undeniably successful today can easily become the rigid anchor that holds you back tomorrow. Whether you're a scrappy startup or a towering giant, you must continuously innovate to survive. Section 6. Lessons for modern entrepreneurs. All right, let's wrap this up by looking at the specific playbook we can extract from Ford's journey. Because whether your tech is lines of code or an engine with 4 wheels, the forces of business are identical. First, failure is information. Ford's early flop showed him exactly what not to do. Second, solve a mass market problem by expanding the market rather than just serving the elite. Third, process innovation matters. How you build it is just as important as what you build. Fourth, scale changes everything. A good product creates satisfied customers, but a scalable system builds an empire. Fifth, lower your prices aggressively to expand opportunity to millions. And finally, never become a prisoner of your greatest success, because the market is always going to change beneath your feet. I'll leave you with this final thought for your own endeavors. Ford didn't invent the automobile, just like Steve Jobs didn't invent the personal computer, and Jeff Bezos didn't invent retail commerce. The greatest entrepreneurs don't always pull some brand new category out of thin air. Often, they just find a revolutionary way to take something that already exists, strip away the friction, lower the cost, and bring it to the masses. So ask yourself, how can you make what already exists available to absolutely everyone? Keep that in mind as you look at the world around you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.